Now to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. With over 40 years in social services in New Zealand, PNG in Australia, he has extensive experience of child protection and foster care, disabilities, seniors, and over 11 years in housing, homelessness and poverty. He's been the CEO of Monte Cecilia Housing Trust for just over 3 years, taking the trust from 40 properties to over 140 properties. He's also on Community Housing Aotearoa Council, the PIC body for New Zealand community housing providers. He's been, I already said that. He is also on the sorry, I actually doubled up on my introduction. My apologies, my sincere apologies. Family, to bless us this morning, our keynote address, please put your hands together for Bernie Smith. Thank you, Bernie.
What a great way for me to start at a conference, Brian. I'm socially awkward, I'm an introvert, and to be standing in front of 400 women trying to dance is not a great way to start the morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you this morning. Firstly, let me acknowledge Maori as the traditional owners and custodians of this country. I recognise their connection to this land, to the wind, water and to community. I pay my respects to them, to their culture and to their elders, both past and present and for those to come. And in making that acknowledgement, I also acknowledge the many cultures represented here today, which brings, I believe, a richness and a diversity to this country that we should be proud of. So, who am I? My river is the mighty Waikato, my mountain Taupiri, where during the Depression years my grandparents lived under its shadow right on the riverbank in a makeshift shelter. That was during the Depression years. My father went to work as a 14-year-old to support his family, and he purchased his two younger sisters their first bikes. I was born in the 50s to teenage parents and spent my formative years in this house in Webb Street, Huntly. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, these homes actually had those low 3-foot mesh wire fences, and that was a duplex. So we were on the left-hand property. That's as the property stands a couple of years ago. I'm a pioneer and an innovator, and I refuse to accept the status quo if it creates barriers to success for those who are disempowered. I'm passionate about what I do, and often I'm not politically correct. I firmly believe every person and family has the right to stand tall in their culture, in their faith, in their gender, as an individual and as a family. And I will do whatever is legally possible to ensure that that is possible for those that we seek to support. My belief is that this government has spent its time in government claiming all the issues that they are confronted with today are solely due to the previous government, when in my opinion, what they and you and I are confronted with today is the fact that over 30 successive years, governments have not put the time, the effort, or the funding that build strong, healthy communities for present and future generations. What I want to say today, even though it's only, I'm only commenting on it in a couple of sentences, I strongly believe in silos we fail our whānau, but working together, whānau and communities grow strong. Every child deserves a champion, an adult who insists that they become the best they possibly can be. And you and I know that sometimes you and I are those adults. Anne Frank said, "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before beginning to change the world." And we can stand back and use all sorts of reasoning why we're not doing what we could be doing when we just need to get on with it. So who is Monte Cecilia Housing Trust? Been around for 37 years, providing advocacy, supported housing services for those living in poverty who are homeless in South and West Auckland. We've assisted over 15,000 families, but the key here is over 28,000 children. Getting families onto the housing register at the right level, ensuring that they're receiving the correct WINS payments, immigration issues, health, police, budgeting, legal, tenancy tribunal hearings, sustaining tenancies when under a threat from eviction in private and also in Housing New Zealand properties. Assisted families and overcrowding, rent arrears, community fatigue, living in substandard housing conditions, poor maintenance, and the biggest area that we support families in is in translating, because many of our families, English is a second language. And for most of us, navigating bureaucracy is difficult enough when we understand English. So imagine a family whose language is not English. In fact, Monte Cecilia was assisting families before government even realised there was a poverty and a homelessness issue. And yet yesterday, Judge Beecroft alluded to the fact, which affirms what I'm saying, that we are 30 to 40 years in the making to where we are today. Monte Cecilia owns 23 homes, rents or leases another 110 social housing homes, leases 35 emergency housing properties. So we hope to have about 200 odd homes by the end of this year. And the reason I say this is that 3.5 years ago we had 40 properties and a very small budget and didn't know whether we were going to exist into the next financial year. And so we've grown substantially, so much so I even had a ring yesterday from an owner of a hotel that wants Monte Cecilia to take management of it so that we can put homeless families into a safe, secure and warm housing option. Mind you, the hard part is to get the government to fund it, but they have made the recommendation, so we're hopeful that they will be supportive of us. Monte Cecilia is child-centred, family-focused, community-orientated, with a business, as a business with a social heart. Now, I know many of you as social workers struggle with the business side of the NGO sector. But let me say that if we don't create businesses as NGOs with strategic and business plans, with a constant bottom line view, aren't agile and adaptive and creative, with leading edge service delivery, then time will come when your trust will no longer be relevant. Today, more than ever, We not only need to be child-centric, but it's over time that we became culturally centric. I'm appalled after being involved in the 80s when we went to becoming bicultural in our policies and in our practice. And returning to New Zealand, it appeared to me that we hadn't moved very far forward. So we need to ensure that culturally we are appropriate when dealing with the families and whānau that come to us. Monte Cecilia, myself as CEO, we have an operations manager, 6 housing staff, 10 social work staff. All social work staff are qualified and registered. 2 administration staff and 3 part-time staff. Recruitment focuses on skilled and qualified Maori, Samoan and Tongan people who are fluent in their language and fully understand their culture. Only then can we begin to understand the cultural barriers, issues and pressures that impact them on a day-to-day basis. 1,100 to 1,600 children use our services on a yearly basis. 60% are Samoan, 15% Maori, 15% Tongan, and 10% other. Now you might say, why is there such, we've got a Palangi as a CEO, how come there's 60% Samoan? It's because they tell each other about the great work that we are doing. We don't have to advertise our service. They come to us. We have 30 to 40 families on any given day waiting to see one of our social workers. The other thing I'm very passionate about is professional development for our social work staff. And so we have a budget of $1,000 per staff member to ensure that they remain not only accredited, but on top of the latest things that they need to be aware of. Dr. Russell Wills, as the previous Children's Commissioner, said every child has a right to live in a place that is safe and healthy. A car is not that place. A garage is not that place. This is a crisis for our kids, and action is needed now. And it's interesting that New Zealand signed up to that 20 years ago, and look at where we are today. Children at risk, there's tens and thousands of them admitted to hospitals and health clinics and preventable sicknesses. In 2013 census in counties Manukau, it was identified there were 100,000 families living in substandard housing. And I believe that that has now increased to 200,000. And when you think the population is only 500 to 600,000, that's a high proportion of families. And those are predominantly Maori and Pacifica families. The key causes of these preventable sicknesses are often linked back to homelessness, poor housing, and poverty, leading to disabilities, leading sadly to disease and even to death. Last year, Monte Cecilia had 3 children who had chemotherapy and ended up coming to us because their families were homeless. We had a child with brittle bone disease who came to us with the hospital bed because he had no home to go to. I get into the media quite a lot, and so it pays off from time to time, because last year I was talking about these 3 children, how inappropriate it was for them to come to a shared facility when their immune systems were so low, and the families needed privacy. The children needed a place that was safe and warm and secure. And I said, sadly, there was no room in Ronald McDonald House. I said that on media, and it wasn't within a few days. Their media liaison person contacted me to say that they needed to have a chat. What Ronald McDonald House didn't understand was that even though their policy is that they do not house families and children from the city in which Ronald McDonald House exists, that's for out-of-towners, when they realised that they were sending homeless children out back into the community, they've changed their policy. And they've advised me that homeless children will not end up in facilities like ours that put them further at risk. Judge Beecroft said yesterday, currently 1 in every 4 children in Aotearoa, New Zealand, lives in low-income household, where their family and whānau struggle to provide them with the basics needed to allow them to flourish. Each of us want families to be able to flourish. A lot of people don't understand the housing continuum, so I thought for you, working with families often in these circumstances, it's really great to be able to use this to give you a greater understanding. Now, the government talks about emergency housing. When the government talks about emergency housing, they're talking about families in motels. That's it. Monte Cecilia has always been classed as an emergency housing provider, not a transitional housing provider, because we believe that any family that comes to us is in a crisis and it's an emergency. But we have no choice but to live with some of these new changes that the government's made. The difference with emergency housing is that every 7 days, the families have to prove that they've checked with property and rental markets that there is a rental probability or not. Well, that's a bit ridiculous when rents are $500, $600, $700, $800 per week. But families are forced to do that and live in that stress and trauma, not knowing whether they'll be able to be extended in that motel. And often that week is only booked for that week, for that family, and they end up having to get another motel. Transitional housing, which we called emergency housing, is a 100% government-funded program which provides not only accommodation, but it provides a 3-month wraparound service where we do a lot of financial literacy, getting children back into school, getting them connected to Plunkett and health services, getting them involved with Family Start. A lot of things that we do to assist families back on their feet. And then the following 3 months, we, under contract, need to follow those families up. Sadly, the 3 months is turning into 6 months, and 6 months is turning into 9 months. And now we're finding that families are actually in motels and transitional housing, not for 3 months, but often for 9 and 12 months, which is totally inappropriate and unacceptable when you're connecting children to schools, which are likely to have to change yet again. But this housing continuum takes people from homelessness at one end through to market or home ownership at the other end. You can see that the community housing providers are in that up to shared ownership product, and then the private market, and then the market ownership. The issue that I have and the beef that I have with government is that they've poured a lot of money into emergency transitional and now housing first, and now they've got Kiwi Build at the other end. They're not doing enough in the middle for families to transition out of emergency housing into a long-term sustainable rental. So if you hear me in the media complaining, it's complaining about the policy, not the party. And I think we need to sometimes move aside from our party affiliations and get connected to policy and agree or disagree on policy rather than agreeing with everything because we like the party. We need to stop pulling rabbits out of hats and looking for quick fixes. We need to stop the blame game. We need to stop thinking. You and I need to stop thinking. The community at large needs to stop thinking that central and local government will resolve this, because they won't. And they can't. We need, I believe, a housing strategy that's not created by politicians or by bureaucrats, but by the homeless, by those that are renting, by community housing providers and social service providers, by people with lived experience, and particularly by Maori and Pacifica and other ethnic groups. And that has not been done to date. In Mangere, we've got houses being designed at the moment for that community, and they have not yet designed a home suitable for a Pacifica or a Maori family. It's a bog standard Pākehā house. We need a strategy that is not Canadian or Australian, or in fact any other country, but a New Zealand strategy that recognises our commitment in and to the treaty, a housing design suitable for Maori and for Pacifica and other ethnic groups, that recognises intergenerational living, and that which is affordable. Affordable is the 30 to 70, maybe 80,000 total household income, not for those in 90,000 and above, because predominantly they're not the families that you and I are working with. I believe that the focus today is on housing volume instead of community value focus. A community value focus is where people matter. Their housing option, whether it's state housing, whether it's a private renter, whether it's owner-occupier, where everyone is seen as an equal and there's no NIMBYism. Communities where people feel that they can put their roots down, where they can get their medical and educational and social and religious needs met. A community where every man, woman and child can stand tall in their culture, their faith, their gender, and feel valued. Politicians and bureaucrats, can't design such a strategy. I've been down to Wellington, I don't know how many times, to co-design. And I sit with those bureaucrats and they've already designed half of it, and we're asked to input into the second half. Co-design, I believe, is from a blank sheet. And if you and I don't know what we're doing on the front line, then who does? These are the statistics that we're dealing with today. In March 2016, there were 3,877 people on the housing wait register. That's to get a Housing New Zealand property. In March this year, it is now 11,067. They've not released the last quarterly statistics. I suspect politically it'll be over 12,000. Kiwi Build, get me started on Kiwi Build. Kiwi Build, 10,000 homes every year for the next 10 years, half of them in Auckland. And what have we had? 20 months later, 170 Kiwi-built homes, a third of them not sold and purchased back from the developers. And they're not even relevant to the people that you and I work with. And for goodness sake, why is Labour Party supporting middle to upper class people? I just don't get it. And if they think they can build themselves out of this crisis, then I don't know what they're thinking about. Yes, they promised 1,000 in the first year, but we've got 170. Now this is Kiwi Build. This is what you're paying 600,000 for. Was it 579? And a 4-bedroom 649. This is in Papakura. These are warm, dry and healthy homes. They are the day that you move in. But look at that lovely children's bedroom there. Teddies, pillows, toys. But look out the window. They would have been better to paint a picture of a beach or something on the window. My concern, folks, is that there's no sun on that wall. The gutterings on those buildings are right on the wall, so there's no what we call a soffit, which is about a 600 overhang on a normal house. The guttering sits there, the water drops down onto the ground. The water runs down the wall, so how healthy is that going to be in 2 or 3 years' time? The parents are going to open that window and the mould and crap and rubbish is going to come into the bedroom. Those children are going to end up sick. They're not very happy that I use this slide. But this is the reality of what they are proud of. Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream." And my question to you, as Judge Beecroft challenged us yesterday, what's your vision for New Zealand children and their families? Do we, as a nation, have a dream that poverty and homelessness would be rare, brief, and non-recurring? And if we do, then we've got to create some urgency around what we're doing and why we're doing it. I once used that I have a dream analogy at an Indigenous ceremony for young people that had just been awarded a certificate in outback Queensland, Australia. And the head honcho came up to me afterwards and said, "Bernie," he said, "we've all got dreams." I said, "Yeah, isn't it great?" He said, "Yeah, but the problem is if you don't put legs to them, what happens to them? And you might be able to put legs to your dreams, but how are you assisting others to put legs to their dreams?" And I was quite challenged about that, so I'd reframe, "I have a dream." But what is often not said and missed in stories around homeless stats is the increasing numbers of children. Now, when I've talked to the housing minister about identifying every homeless child as an A18 or A20, which is at the most highest, most at-risk level that you can be, which gives you the first priority for a vacant Housing New Zealand home, he said, "No, we can't do that because it would disadvantage others." We heard yesterday that the children in their formative years need to be in safe, secure, warm homes for them to be able to develop. But they've been, Monte Cecilia is finding, and you will be finding in your work, that children are often transient, they're highly at risk because of their homelessness, they're disconnected from school, they're disconnected from their church, they're disconnected from social activities, and that is not acceptable in New Zealand. At our housing conference in May this year, a Maori lady told her powerful family story And two of her comments that she said really stood out to me. And I'm sure many families could use this term. She said, "We've had many houses, but not a home." But she was able to celebrate because she was able to achieve home ownership. And she said, "I no longer have a landlord. I am now Lord of my home." What a wonderful way to feel empowered and to feel safe and to feel secure. In Australia, as across the rest of the world, we are confronted with a homelessness crisis like we've never seen before. This statement was used in a recent housing media release, and I thought it was quite powerful. Houses are hubs of care, practices and relations. They are places of everyday care, of cooking, cleaning, washing, of care between household and family members. Houses are where we care for children, for elders, partners and ourselves. Houses are also anchors for community and neighbourhood-based care. We keep an eye on neighbours' homes, support older neighbours to age in place, and care for pets. This care work is what keeps us alive. Even though care is not always done well, it is the essential practice that it is connected in fundamental ways with housing. Without housing, it can be very difficult to meet basic needs. And I didn't want to do that because I'm using someone else's wording, but I'd just take houses out and put homes in its place. Maslow's hierarchy of needs recognises that housing is not the be-all and the end-all, and that is the problem with the way that government, and I'm sure that you experience, with government funding that funds services that are for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks. It should be for duration of need. We're setting families up to fail when we take an opportunity to have an opportunity to work with them in a bubble and then say, right, you're on your own, because our contract doesn't allow us to work with you any longer. We can have all the funding in the world for social, health and educational needs, but a child or a family without a home does not have a future or a hope. I want to take you to Australia, where I worked for 7 years. I don't know if you know North Queensland. Anyone been to Cairns? Yep, a few people. Great spot. We holidayed there and then decided it would be a good place to work. In Cairns, there's 3,700 state homes, where state housing was so intensified that 7 out of 10 homes in lots of streets were state housing. And housing staff had 300 to 400 tenancies each to manage, not unlike Housing New Zealand. And then we wonder why they're so reactive rather than proactive. During the GFC in, I think it was about 2008, the Commonwealth government decided to fund across the country in every state billions of dollars worth of new social housing. In Cairns, we got 282 new apartments and a handful of 4 and 5 bedroom homes. And I was given the role as nation building manager for Far North Queensland to complete final building defect notifications before building handovers from developers. But more importantly, I was given the responsibility to tenant all these properties. Now, a bit like the New Zealand Housing New Zealand policy, they take the top 5% of the high risk people to home. So if you don't know, at the moment, Housing New Zealand is gatekeeping the families that they house. They don't tell you that publicly, but if a family is registered at under age 16, so forget about the B's and C's, so if they're at age 16, they might be lucky to get a home. 3 years ago, it was A14. So they're actually gatekeeping the amount of families that they can actually house. And I suspect that the 12,000 that are on the housing register, if we really fully understood it, would be 24,000. We do not know the numbers that we have in New Zealand that are homeless. So what I did, being me and being given this role, I created a matching for success framework to house families into apartment blocks. We looked at health needs, addictions, mental health, disabilities, seniors, solo parents, single adults, families, Indigenous and ethnic groups. And then apartment block by apartment block, I guess I was socially engineering, but I was looking to create communities in each of those apartment blocks. It went so well and was going so well, the government wanted to know why it was working so well. And at that point, I had to fess up that I had moved from 5% to the top 15% to allow us to create a community. Two of the apartment blocks that the government built, one was in Palm Cove. How many been to Palm Cove? Holiday makers go there from all over the world. There's not one social housing property in the area. It's about 25 minutes out of Cairns. And they built this apartment block, one block back from the beach. So that went really well with the locals. Worse still, they built another apartment block in Bluewater Estate. Bluewater Estate is between Palm Cove and Cairns, and they pull their yachts up outside of their back door. So it's a canal subdivision. All of the homes are over $1 million, and the boats would be over $1 million. So the multi-million-dollar setup. The Commonwealth Government bought a block of land right at the front entrance of this development. I was given the responsibility to consult with community. We're on national TV. We had all sorts of vandalism. We had marches. We had all sorts of things. Again, NIMBYism, not in my backyard. But we built a 20-unit apartment block. We landscaped it. We put window dressings in so there weren't any flags or sheets hanging in the windows. We ensured that the clotheslines were at the back of the apartment block. We painted the big red firebox out the front, the same colour as the buildings. And I had many sleepless nights. But using matching for success, I put a couple of single parents into two of the apartments, and then alongside them I put in two couple retirees. So the retirees became quasi-grandparents for the young parents. The young parents had no family in North Queensland. One of the old couples, who was a housing tenant, would ring us every other day. Either the grass was too long or they were lonely and needed a cup of tea or a friend. Once they were placed in this apartment, we never heard from them again. We put in a couple of people that had mental health issues. And one particular person used to drive us nuts because she would forget to take her medication. But we put in another couple of people who were able to support her. And I'm not saying they managed or had any authority over her, but they were able to pick up through body language and behaviours to check in with her. Oh, did you remember to take your meds today? Not an issue moving forward. You know, that department block 12 months later, when that whole community of several hundred homes was, the entrance was shut and they had a community barbecue, those public housing tenants were invited to the barbecue that Christmas. Many of those people that went into that apartment went on from diplomas to degrees, went from unemployment to employment, went from not having a university degree to going to a university because it was just 10 minutes down the road. We had a person with a disability that couldn't find a workplace close enough for him to work. And there was a big mall just down the road and he was able to find work. And why I'm sharing this is that, one, create community and they support each other. Secondly, put people in a brand new, warm, secure housing solutions, and then they start dreaming their own dreams. They move from living in crises on a moment by moment, day by day, hour by hour, to beginning to aspire to the things that you and I aspire to. Once I'd sorted that, I'm the type of person that likes challenges, and so I was looking for another challenge, and I ended up in a place called Mount Isa, backside of Queensland, compared to Cairns. A mining town of about 24,000. Temperatures in winter would drop to 0, and summer would rise to 50. I was the service centre manager for Mount Isa Housing Service Centre, 1,600 tenancies. See the big dip in the middle there? There's a place called Mornington Island. I had tenancy managers on a Monday morning hopping on a plane to fly to do their tenancy management activities. I had other staff have to drive 5 hours to visit tenants. There's many stories I could tell, but I want to tell you a story about a suburb of Pioneer that's right in Mount Isa. Crime and youth suicide was extremely high. 90% of our tenancies, public housing tenancies, like Housing New Zealand, were Indigenous peoples. And I really struggled by the fact that we were being so reactive and so legalistic in the way that we were managing tenants, that we were not doing anything to empower people towards their own dreams and aspirations. So we started by getting free access to the council dump. We got sponsorship for waste bin pickups. We bought in trucks to take all the car bodies away. And over one day, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m, out of the 270 tenancies, 127 got involved, plus my staff, and cleaned up that community. And there was, where have I written it here somewhere? There was tons and tons and tons of rubbish that were taken. And the problem is, you see, when you're dealing with low socioeconomic families that don't have the ability to get to the dump, don't have the resources in the sense of a car to take stuff away, and yet a lot of the cheaper stuff breaks easily. What do you do with disposable nappies? The list goes on, and a lot of skills were lacking, was creating this issue. The community never looked better. Then we went on and we did a survey to find out from these tenants what they would like to do for themselves. And what the theme that came through was that in Queensland, if you're unemployed, you're forced to do training programs. And most of these tenants had enough certificates that they could wallpaper one wall in their lounge, but no sustainable work out the other end. And so what we decided to do, I dreamed up this model called Earning, Learning and Appropriate Housing. A colleague of mine who was also a Kiwi, we won't hold that against him, but he was the director of TAFE, which is equivalent to Polytech here in New Zealand. And we met together and we workshopped, and we came up with a Indigenous Maintenance Program certificate, construction and maintenance certificate. I then reached out to a local Indigenous construction firm. We put them through a procurement process, and then they created an organisation called Rainbow Gateway. Then we invited all of those public housing tenants that were interested to join this work program. We got 14. When there's drugs and alcohol, mental health and all sorts of other issues, it was really difficult to work through the process. But we ended up selecting 14 candidates. All 14 trainees were put through health and safety, use of power and hand tools. They spent 6 weeks in a road camp learning about their culture and their roots, which gave them great pride because many of these young people did not understand their heritage. At the end of that year, 7 of those 14 got certificates. Within 18 months, 5 of them had gone into apprenticeships. And from my perspective as well, what was happening was that we were saving tens of thousands of dollars because we were employing people at a living wage level and not contractors who saw the government as the golden egg and charging like a wounded bull. After I left Queensland, one of the apprentices got Apprentice of the Year. I was privileged to win an award in 2015, which you see the picture there. That's just telling me my time's up. In June 2015, I won the Queensland Housing and Public Works Ideas into Action Award. The University of Queensland Aboriginal Environment Research Centre Director Professor Paul Mimmet stated it was an innovative and progressive initiative that was the first for Australia because of the integration. It integrated learning, training and employment and housing into one, and doing this by establishing an Aboriginal building industry while encouraging the dream of home ownership. Around the home ownership, the idea was that each of those apprentices will get the opportunity, once we've done some minor upgrades in those homes, that they would rent that home, still from the government, at a capped rent for 2 years. They'd have a financial mentor working with them over those 2 years, and then they would get the first right of refusal to purchase. And the idea there was to stop the government from selling public housing to investors who would then rip off the low socioeconomic families and rent like a wounded bull. My wife won't like me saying this, and she's not here, so it won't matter. But my wife is a senior practitioner, social worker for many years, is an entrepreneur herself, and her and I work together, I in the housing, her in the child protection with child safety in Queensland. And this is what I'm talking about in collaboration. It's amazing that these agencies, 2 government agencies, can't actually work together more closely. It's not about who you sleep with, excuse the pun. But my wife is as passionate as I. I provided the state housing for families to be reunified with their children. In 18 months, she was able to reunify 48 Indigenous children back to their families. We spend too much time uplifting children without working with families. We're so risk adverse, and we need to be strength-based. It's easy to blame government and blame our managers and blame lack of funding, but what are we doing personally that is solution-focused? And I can speak for myself, getting out of my Pākehā security models into Māori and Pacifica frameworks, and out of our agency silos into collaborations, and acknowledging that we can't be all things to all people, and acknowledging that our whānau will only grow strong when we collaborate and celebrate each other's services. And I acknowledge, as a CEO of an NGO and been managers of a number of NGOs here in New Zealand, the government has forced us into silos. But we've got to get out of them ourselves. And we've got to work together and celebrate that we can't be all things to all people, but together we can make a difference. Oranga Tamariki in Taupo had 8 children in 8 different foster homes across the central North Island. They'd tried in Auckland time and time again to get those children into one family home because they had whānau in Auckland that was willing to care for them. Monte Cecilia found that home, and those 8 children earlier this year were reunited with their siblings for the first time in a number of years. And let me just say, because time's up and I know morning tea is calling. This is a favourite saying of mine. I could tell many, many stories, and I'm sure you can as well. But it moves, it moves me when you get opportunities to make a difference. But often you and I have to create those opportunities. Never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And from the Cape to Southland, imagine what 40 Family Start services could do to change this nation's children's lives by further creativity and further partnerships. What's your vision for children in your community? I hope you go from this conference further inspired to be a change maker like Mother Teresa, who said when asked, how does she do it? She said, one family at a time. Thank you.